Probably go ahead and get started. It's about 2 o'clock. Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to our, this is March 6th already, Belfair Sewer Plan proposals. Is a continuation of our meeting from last week. We do have some guests with us this afternoon from the Department of Ecology. Before we get started, we'll go around the room and just state our name for the record. I will get us started and then we'll move to my right. Kevin Schutte.
Carrie Jeffries.
Diane Kleinberg.
Sally Toda.
Greg Zettler, Ecology.
Michael Heimbach, Shelton Mason County Journal.
Brian McClellan.
Pat Loudon.
Jerry Egenrod.
Bart Staff.
Jennifer Byerly.
Jerry Howe.
Greg Pinter.
Diedrich Allen.
Randy Meadow.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks everybody for making it out here today. Appreciate the opportunity to continue the conversation from last week. I think, Frank, if you can get us started, and then we can welcome Ecology in, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. And
We have plenty of time at the end. Thank you, Commissioners. This is a follow-up briefing in regards to the Belfair Sewer Plan proposal. Again, the purpose of the briefing today is to facilitate a conversation around developing an updated financial plan for the Belfair Sewer and to incorporate into it financial plans for all the other utilities. This is where we ended up our conversation last week, which was to say to meet with the Department of Ecology next week to discuss financing, review takeaway from today to evaluate options, meet the week of March 13th to discuss final review of the revised Belfair Sewer Plan, as well as to review options for the Russellwood Sewer. So decisions, maybe that's not a correct term, but opportunities from the 227 meeting that came forward was to say to allow septics in areas where currently there are no main sewer lines, to quell the notion of, quote, a moratorium of some kind in Belfair, to eliminate the need for temporary storage tanks in the code. The current code says that if you are not within distance to hook to the sewer, that you must hook up to a storage tank, which then the county would empty on a regular basis, and that would be an alternative to putting a septic in the ground. Department of Health had identified difficulties with that, in that the county cannot engage in that practice. So it was decided that we should take that out of our county code. If the decision was to allow septics, but to require that those that do build new construction would hook up to the sewer line when it came through the region, it would require those new construction builders or homeowners CFC fees to be paid currently, and as well to put hookups in the ground so that when the sewer came by, that it would automatically be hooked right in and the septic would be decommissioned. To memorialize the assistance from the 09 sales tax and the REIT 2 funds for a longer term. Also to discuss lowering the CFC rates to the previous plan scheduled $5,000, and or to what the original plan suggested was $5,000 1 year, $6,000, $7,000, and then bump up incrementally for the next couple of years. Address a multi-family fee structure for ERU costs. Review the sustainability of $99 rates for ERUs. And draft a letter to the DOE to address the 1,700 hookup requirement. That is part of our conversation that we're going to have with the Department of Ecology today, as a follow-up to the conversation that we had with Commissioner Schutte, Dave Wyndham, myself, Senator Sheldon, and another couple of other members from the Department of Commerce. Here's what the Belfair loans are that are currently outstanding. The top five are the Department of Ecology loans. Their original loan balance was $9,164,000. Installments on those are $602,000 roughly. Current balance, now this is as of the annual report 2015, so that would be December 2015's numbers. That would be $7,465,000. We have an LTGO bond that we put in place in 2011 that we started paying on in 2012. There's a couple of series within that bond, so it's 2% and or 3.9% that we're paying on. Original balance on that was $6.2 million. The current installments on that is $380,000, and our outstanding balance is $4,190,000. This is the loan that we started paying principal on in this year. We had a balloon payment that was due of I think it was $2,100,000 in 2014. Then it was principal only, interest only, and in 2017 it started carrying principal and interest. So our debt payment went up an additional $250,000 this year to carry the additional principal.
380 is.
That includes
Not correct.
that is
That is
the correct number with the additional principal payment due this year.
And then Frank, what year was the balloon payment again?
I believe it was 2014,
14.
2 million.
What's it, 1.8?
2 million one, I think is what it was. I can confirm that, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 2 million one. In additionally, we have an internal bond that the general fund purchased from Belfair for $1.2 million. That was in the summer of 2015 to facilitate the final payment to the contracting company. Where it's a interest-only payment on that for $18,000, so our outstanding is still $1.2 million. Total original financing amount was $16,564,000. Our debt service currently is just under $1 million, and the balance is $12,855,000 for outstanding. So these were the questions that I posed to the Department of Ecology. There were a couple at the bottom that I added as a function of final review over the weekend and having some conversations this morning. So the questions are, and I'll leave this up here so that the Department of Ecology can answer them, and then facilitate a conversation in regards to additional follow-up questions. So the question we have is, what is our ability to refinance current debt as to terms and or as to rates with the Department of Ecology? What new loans can be applied for and how? What is the granting application and the funding cycle within the Department of Ecology? What kinds of matching commitments are required? You notice the way I worded that, as opposed to how much you're going to forgive. How would joint venture financing be handled? And this is in regards to Puget Sound Industrial Complex.
Sure.
Is sewer and reclaimed water financing requirements the same? And then how do we handle the DOE commitments from below? And I'll just quick turn to that page. So this is a document that we received from the Department of Ecology identifying commitments that they had for the different funding options that, or actually funding that we received from them. And these were items that were in, as I understand, in our application, not necessarily in our loan
I
documentation.
believe that's correct, right.
So I'll let you.
Sure, as I recall, we put this together 5 years or more ago. Not because we were trying to figure out what you owed us, but just trying to figure out what was going on, what your plans were, because there had been different things said in different applications, so this wasn't put together as a means to say you owe us something, it's just, what are you planning on doing? That's it.
So these are, none of these are items that we are committed to, other than we've identified them in our applications to the Department of Ecology and hope to be able to be successful at in the ultimate disposition of the Belfair sewer. That we would be able to eliminate certain number of septic systems, that we would have a certain flow forecasting through the facility. So at this point, we were projecting, let's go back to 2015, we were projecting 1,824 ERUs with 0.321 million gallons per day of flow. Actual numbers are 416 ERUs and what, 80,000?
60,000.
Yeah, 0.6, 06 MGDs, which is less than what we were projecting in 2005. So the number of hookups is dramatically less, and obviously that's a function of how much sewer pipe we have in the ground. But it is of the reality of where we are currently. So to address the questions then, if I may. The first one is the ability to refinance and what kinds of refinancing programs there may or may not be out there.
Sure. That's the most complicated question. We'll probably spend the most time on it. Currently, right now, we have the authority to finance projects for 20-year terms. And we don't think we have the authority to refinance our own loans at that 20-year period. So you're one of our existing loans. If you came to us and said, gee, we'd like to refinance for another 20 years, we'd say, we don't think we can do that. And I don't think you're interested in that. I think you've come to us and said, what about 30 years? We're in the process right now of developing a rule to allow us to offer loans over a 30-year period. And we haven't finalized that rule, and we haven't finalized how we're going to implement that rule. And the question about, well, might we be able to refinance to 30 years? We have to review that question as not, view that question as not just coming from you, but as what if all the people we had loans out to for 20 years statewide came to us and said, we'd like to refinance those to 30 years. So we view this in a larger context. So the answer isn't no, but it's to be able to refinance you to 30 years, we have to go through a process to establish some policies to figure out who would be eligible for this kind of refinancing and what kind of conditions would be put around that. And that's not something that's going to really happen in the short term. Our focus right now is just getting the rule out. Whether we can offer refinancing to 30 years, or to put it another way, to adjust the rates on your current loans, is something we'd have to explore over the longer term. So we've been exploring, and I think Frank and Jerry have been doing the same thing, exploring some other options. And I think the take-home message on this exercise is, for us, is we think your best bet is to explore your other options, because we can't really guarantee you that we can adjust your rates to a 30-year term.
Are you looking to predominantly allow for that in the next cycle of new construction?
We're looking at that predominantly as, here's how we'll go forward with new loan agreements, is to offer 30-year terms on the assumption that what we're financing are assets that have a 30-year life,
Or
or on average, you know.
What about, even if you can't do it at the 20, what about the idea of or do it at 30, what about the idea of refinancing at 20 at a much lower interest rate?
We don't think we have the authority, and this is in the Clean Water Act, to refinance our own existing loans.
That's what you told me
Right.
several years back when I went.
Yeah,
But
I'm glad I'm being consistent, thank you.
being consistent, yeah.
Yeah,
That press release said other things, and so,
yeah.
Well, that referred to the 30-year that Greg mentioned in the meeting, the potential for a rule change that they're reviewing. It did not include a refinancing of the 20-year. That's not, it was to refinance, to extend the terms
you know,
to 30 years.
even any refinancing was not an option back then, but it sounds like it's still not an option now.
It sounds like it's a possible option
It's,
for, are you saying for new only, or?
we can finance new at 30%. And there's a chance we can adjust your rates on your existing loans, which is like a refinance, except that's going to take a process for us to think about how do we do this for everybody who comes to ask us for this. So that's not likely to happen in the short term. It's going to take us a while to sort that out. Probably be for, if we did it, it would probably be for distressed communities. There's more than one, but it wouldn't be for everybody. There's probably other conditions we put around that if we did it.
Okay. And how would we keep abreast of the process that you're going through for the potential availability of that?
I'd say keep us informed of how your progress is going on other avenues. You know, for instance, we all sat down with USD Rural Development today to discuss another avenue. And I think what was clear is that's one of your avenues, and we'll be staying in close touch with them if you're exploring it.
Mhm.
But just, you know,
So USDA rural development then is another opportunity for us to have a conversation in regards to refinancing as well as financing future
correct, right,
construction or future needs.
right.
And I believe you had mentioned that if future needs takes us to the USDA, that they may have a vehicle available to us to allow for refinancing of the existing debt on Belfair.
Right, and I think the take-home message on them, to simplify, is for every dollar you're borrowing from them, they can refinance $1 from us. Their rates, I don't think are as attractive as our rates. The good news is it's a 40-year term. The bad news is I think it's a percentage point higher than what your outstanding loan balances are.
Mm-hmm. Is that a function of market, or is it a function of their loans are just 100 basis points higher?
They quoted us today what their current rate is. So I'm not sure if it's based on market like ours are. And by the way, that's another thing. Right now, we finance at, I think, 60% of market for a 20-year loan. On our 30-year loans, we'll be financing at 80% of market.
Could you repeat that?
Sure. Our current 20-year loans, we finance at 60% of the market rate. When we go to 30-year, we'll offer those at 80% of market rate. So like RD, the longer period of payback comes with a higher interest rate. So it's something you'll need to run the numbers on.
You said they gave you an estimate of, what was it that they gave you?
The rate,
Yeah.
Jerry,
3.375.
it's about a half a percentage point above,
Yeah.
a little more than
Is local, LOCAO, with the state treasury also available for this type of finance?
I'm not sure, but some of the other avenues we discussed were Community Economic Redevelopment Board, probably more apropos of if you're partnering with the Port of Bremerton and creating jobs there, could help. And then, of course, Community Development Block Grant, which I think you access through the Department of Commerce. But one of the things we came out of today's meeting was it might be useful to get together a larger group of all the funders, and even have a more a recurring meeting, because I think you're going to be developing more information as you talk with partners and have more information as time goes by.
So generally, the pool of financing sources would be USDA, potentially local, CDBG, the Commerce Grant, the
CDBG,
Department of
and,
Commerce, and the Community Economic Development Board.
Revitalization Board, I think.
I was looking at some documentation for something else on CBDG, and I think what I saw had what you're referring to, and it was a limit of $750,000 grant to help hook up poor communities. Is that the funding, is that the program you're talking about?
Let me check, I'd have to check into it. CDBG funds a lot of different, it's they don't fund just sewers, it's water, sewer.
Yeah, it was infrastructure,
Well,
that would help alleviate the cost of the new infrastructure
Right.
to a poor community.
Right. Probably the best thing we would do is to give the staff person at Commerce a call to say, what can you guys do for us?
So if our conversation moves to additional build-out of the sewer, and there are a number of proposals that we're sitting with, either continuing with the expansion as was proposed in applications to your department. There's another alternative, which would be a slight modification to that, a slightly smaller expansion. And then there's a conversation that we've had with Puget Sound Industrial Complex to run sewer pipe up to their facility and eliminate the need for them to build a treatment plant or two. I think their plans, long-term plans, are to put two facilities there, and their current need would be just for the one. I believe it's a million, to grow to 1 million gallons a day.
Yeah.
Their current need is something much less than that. How would we approach the Department of Ecology for financing for that? I know we are in the process of going for design and plan work on one phase of that project. But if you can explain to the commission how the cycle works and how the funding comes through from an application for design, approval, what's our match, to an application for construction,
Sure.
actual construction, when does it fund, and things of that nature.
Okay, and prod me with questions if you want, because I think there's a couple different things going on in Belfair right now. You were exploring a sewer out to the phase 2 area. You're also having some discussions now about going out to Port of Bremerton. So we take applications once a year in the fall, and it's at this point it's running about 15 months between when you apply and when we sign a financial assistance agreement. And we get an application. We score all the applications, rank them in order, and make an assumption on how much money we think we'll have that year. And we put out a draft list, usually around January, just in time for the legislative session. And we think, here's who we think will fund this year. Then we find out how much money we have from the legislature, and we come up with a final list of who we will fund shortly after the legislature leaves town. So that's probably, we're talking, June. You've applied in October, that's June. And then we all sit down and try to hammer out a financial assistance agreement. Some of that time is simply how much time does it take to sign documents, get them back and forth. And it's taking us now to the following December, up to the following December. You apply in October, the following December, 15 months to get those applications finalized, where you now have money. You've come to us this past fall for money for design of the Phase 2 project. You're on our list right now for funding. Depending on how much money we receive from this legislature, we'll come up with a final list. You're high enough up that I expect we propose you for funding in the final list. Probably be December before we have an agreement. You have to be finished with your design before you come to us for money for construction. So if you could hustle your design through in 10 months, you'd be positioned to apply for us for construction essentially 2 years after this past fall.
And when you say, I'm sorry,
Please.
when you say design complete,
So
that didn't happen to Belfair, so
um,
Belfair was more, it wasn't a completed design. I'm not going to go,
Let me,
it was, design was,
Belfair was pretty unique.
yes.
I think you had, it was, I don't know of any other project like Belfair in terms of how it was financed and how the money came together.
Okay, so, but is it 100% complete in your mind, that design needs to be 100% complete in order to
We look
come
for-
back for additional funding?
Yes, we look
Okay.
for, essentially you're ready to bid, which is a little bit awkward because you come to us ready for bid, and then there's a 15-month break in the process until you get construction funding. So we
So
can.
again, there's another 15 months.
Right.
Yep.
So,
Is it reimbursable? Do you have to expend it and then get reimbursed?
typically you do get reimbursed for typically we reimburse you for when you pick your contractor. But let me explore that, go back and explore that question more with our, let me say, let me go back and check on that one. Because
So if we've done financing for Phase 2 and we've completed our design work, is there a possibility that construction financing through the Department of Ecology may not come to fruition
if you've done through design and applied to us for money,
for construction?
for construction, we have a competitive process. So you're competing with people statewide when you apply to us for money. Other people apply to us for money. And it really depends on who's looking for money, how much money do they need, how much money do we have, how does your project stack up in terms of its impact on water quality? We rate that highly.
So we go through another review and waiting process.
Right.
Not wait as in waiting to complete, but a waiting process to evaluate the application in regards
Right.
to the other
Right.
applicants, and are then either awarded, or if we fall below the line, not awarded in that cycle.
Right, but you can get a good feel for who doesn't get funded by just looking at our lists, and I'd be very surprised if you didn't get funded for one of these projects.
Because of the environmental benefit, or what is ranking us so high?
Usually we have the money. The legislature has been very helpful in supplying funding for these projects, so, yeah.
So you are going to the legislature in January and saying, I need $150 million. and
Well,
I'm just picking a number, but
right.
you're giving them an indication of
They
what
can-
you've got applicants for.
Right, they can see that.
Okay.
On the other hand, the Public Works Trust Fund, I think, has done the same thing the last few years, and their money, they haven't been funded. So somehow, and part of it is our funding is, we loan money out, and when that money comes back to us, we can loan that out again. So we're not entirely dependent on a state appropriation. We also get money every year from EPA that we loan out. Of course, we're all interested in what's happening at the federal level with money that we pass through. So we have some income streams that are,
Are those two different applications?
no,
Okay, so you take state money, federal money, pull them together.
correct.
So just curious, if the lodge doesn't appropriate the state portion, are you then you're cutting your list down up to what the Fed money would cover?
I'm gonna be venturing beyond what I can tell you, so let me come back to you on that one.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Greg, I would, I think from where we sit, we have a couple of options that we've put forward. One was the phase 2 that the commission went out last year and sought funding for, that's going through the current process. We have the PSIC component, and then, there's some other things in there. Do you provide any assistance in helping us vet or rank kind of what makes the most sense for us on the county level, like how we can put ourselves in a good position to do the project that makes the most sense from both our standpoint and DOE's?
Sure. The best thing we can help you with there is to help you understand who the funders are and what they can fund, and bring them to the table and discuss various ways of putting together a package. For example, it might make a difference if you're partnering with the Port of Bremerton. It might make a difference if they're putting a large, let's say they're paying the capital charge up front, or if they're funding it on a year-to-year basis. That could make a difference in how you are able to structure a funding package from the agencies. So that's probably the best help we can offer is for you to come up with, here's some ideas on how we fund this. We can say, here's how this fits into the various funding programs.
So if we are working a program with the PSIC as a joint venture, or as partnerships, or as customer provider, each with a different fiscal impact to the provider and or to PSIC, those would each present a different type of financing need, either as Mason County going for financing, or is it a combination of Mason and Kitsap County, or is it a combination of Mason and Port of Bremerton, or is it the Port of Bremerton that's going for financing?
Right.
And they'll own the pipe and we put it together. I mean, those are the two extremes.
Right.
So is there a way, and I think this is what your question was, is there a way that if we look at that proposal relative expanding into phase 2, or relative expanding and modifying the phase 2 plan, if you can help the commission or the county in analyzing which is the best opportunity for us, that's a different question. Do you offer that kind of assistance?
Frank, I think the best thing for us to do is for the staffs to sit down and talk about various options that you can identify to finance either refinance or finance the project. And we can bring together the funders to help explain how we can
Okay.
fund that. And then probably the best thing to do is for you to come back and brief the commission.
Okay, yeah, because right now, our economic shortfall is about $600,000 a year in debt service. So there's 2 or 3 ways of approaching that. Either finding additional revenue, continue to do expansion, or reduce the debt service component and extend the terms out to a point where we can afford the debt service portion of it. Some of that would be with loan refinancing that would be borne by the Belfair residents, and some of those may be options of refinancing that is general obligation bonds refinancing, which would then encumber the entire county. So they all have pros and cons and varying opportunities. But in your case, you would look for us to make the decisions per se on where we want to go, and then you might be able to help us put the financing pieces.
Right, or
together.
come up with some options. Here's
Okay.
3 or 4 or 5 options moving forward, or 3 or 4, or 2 or 3.
Mhm. Does that, is that the same for reclaimed water predominantly?
Actually, we fund sewer and reclaimed water the same way, with the exception if you were to provide reclaimed water back to the port, we might be able to offer a more a more attractive package. So that's a bonus too, you know, if you're putting a sewer in the ground, putting a purple pipe in next to it, appropriate
Just
distance
makes
away.
sense.
Right.
So then, kind of a tie-on question to that is, so the funding that we went out for last year, the commission applied for last year, if we, new commission now decide, okay, would prefer to take a different route than that phase 2 that was identified, what then with that funding stream? Is that just, it goes away for us, that opportunity is lost, and then we can't apply that to another option that we might want to,
We wouldn't, basically correct. For one thing, you know, the port option isn't in part of your current plan. And before you come to us for money for design, you want to make sure you've got the project in your plan, something you've thought about and you've identified it as we're going to do this. So the sequence is amend your plan, make sure the project is there, you know, go through the public meetings, adopt it, and then come back to us.
When you say the plan, are you talking about the UGA?
The
Sewer plan.
general sewer plan.
Just the general sewer
Right.
plan?
The caveat, though, I think, is, you know, if you came to us and said, gee, we want to work on amending our plan to get there, and you needed some money to do that, we could probably take that application that you gave to us for design, and, you know, the money you would need for planning is a much smaller amount of money. You know, find a way to fund your planning at this time.
So you want it specifically in the sewer comprehensive plan, not in our facilities comprehensive plan?
For you, it's probably, I have to check, commonly, we have large communities prepare something called the general sewer plan, which talks about their sewerage and a little bit about their treatment plant. And then they prepare something more specific called a facilities plan about the treatment plant. Typically, smaller communities combine that into a single document, and I can't remember yours, but I would bet it's a single document.
Because we did make sure, we did get that into last minute in our comprehensive plan, the facilities comprehensive plan.
We did add it to the,
It's not in the plan he's talking
Not the one he's talking about, but we did get it.
yeah, we have it in our comp
Because
plan.
we got it the last minute, we had it put in.
And you probably want to amend your general sewer plan at this point then, so it will match your comprehensive land use plan.
What kind of matching commitments do you make, and how do you work on your debt forgiveness programs?
The good news is we don't have a match requirement.
Okay.
But I think with respect to debt forgiveness, there are communities, hardship communities, where we offer loan, and that we offer, part of that loan is forgivable principal, essentially a grant. It's typically, it might be 50%, so perhaps if we gave somebody a $2 million loan, $1 million might be forgivable. Well, since you're borrowing $1 million, you're essentially matching it, the $1 million we're giving you. So that's how that is handled.
Okay.
So Commissioner Netherland, I keep thinking you might have a question, and
Well, no, but for the end.
Okay.
Because there's something I'm hoping you're gonna say to us that.
I'm gonna say it now so you can get out
Sure,
of it.
sure. You know, we met years ago, and I appreciate Sally through all that together, and we were able to get together, and we also had meetings individually with some of them here. There was different things we went over, and I remember at the time, one of the ones that stuck out the most was the bald gentleman and me going back and forth about, we have to finish this stuff and get this stuff out there, and I was explaining at the time, finish nothing, we're trying to survive it. And I don't know if you remember those conversations, how they got, but one of the things that has come up is that you guys may be willing to tell us that we have overcome and met all of our requirements and commitments, and that we're not in any way risk of non-performance. For example, on page number 40, number 5, where the very last line says septic systems within the Belfair UGA Commission, that you're not gonna hold us to any, that you actually have the authority to tell us that. I hope you do, and if you do, I'd sure love to hear it, so we can have that official and sleep better.
We appreciate the representations that were made in applications about what your intentions were over the long term. We didn't consider those binding commitments and financial assistance agreements. So, no, we aren't going to hold your feet to the fire to either you hook up every system and, hook up every septic system in the UGA in the next 5 years, and we're coming after you for the grant money. We're not doing that. And if you'd like to write us a letter to say, can you confirm that?
To ask the questions.
We would love to do that. Thank
And
you.
then you have response.
No, I very much appreciate that, thank you.
Right.
Your shoulders just rose.
It did, yes.
Well, only if then we could move on to the discussion of septic systems on new development.
Well, I think that's something you want to discuss with the Department of Commerce, because they're the state agency that oversees the regulations about how you do that. And actually, we had a discussion, I think, 5 years ago on this subject. And it's, I think that there's a state regulation, and I think that talk to Congress, that's the best thing for me to say.
So you don't have the regulatory
It's not our.
say on
No,
that? Okay.
no, we're here to loan you money.
But if it's helpful for us to be in that conversation, just like Greg and his team have been regularly
Mhm.
at the staff level or.
And you guys were in that one, because that's the one where they came out and everything changed, so you know more about it than we do. I was one of the audience members at that point.
I was thinking you were
Yeah.
the only other person who was in the room.
Yeah, I was in the room here, yes.
So, can you recap what that conversation, what changed?
Literally, they just came out and, or after their meeting, they said, we were told we have commitments we have to meet, and they didn't do it from then on. That's why they went to the holding tanks and just completely dropped the idea of releasing our so-called moratorium, where they would allow us to subdivide and to build again.
I think, Randy, you may be talking about two different things. I don't think it was the perceived commitments, although it might have been.
I was just going off what was said by the commission at the time.
Sure.
So I wasn't in that room.
There's a state regulation that Commerce has written overseas, defining how you provide urban services in urban growth areas. And what it has to say about septic systems is, it may be appropriate as a transitional strategy as part of the phasing plan, and that may be what you're considering. It's appropriate to try to serve hard-to-reach places where it may be cost prohibitive to get in there with the sewer, or where it's the best technology available. So I think what you may be considering is, we need a transitional strategy. This, I'd say, call Commerce up, say, we'd like to have a conversation. We'd be happy to participate, be part of the institutional memory. But it's, that's where you want to go for this question.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
I know it did, but I just didn't know if you guys assumed some sort of regulatory
No.
authority there.
that was when we met a few weeks ago. The Commerce had used the example of, I believe it was Gold Bar, that is a UGA that is completely septic. And, you know, as just an example of that it is permissible with a plan.
Let us check on that. I'm sure, my suspicion is it is permissible with the plan, but let's find out exactly what's happening at Gold Bar for you, and we'll get back
Sure.
to Jerry and Frank.
When you're looking at that, would you also look at Olympia? Because at the same time we're having all those conversations, it had come up that Olympia allowed for part of theirs to still be hooked up to septic systems.
Sure.
But they weren't forcing the hookups.
Now, would that be that transition piece that would require that sewer plan that we were just discussing?
That's a good question. I wonder if it couldn't be referenced in our update to the sewer facilities plan.
Or you might just ask Commerce, how much detail do you need here?
Yeah.
You know, we've got a plan, we've got a sewer, you know.
It would definitely need to be in our comp plan.
It would be easy enough to incorporate it in the update to the facilities plan, the sewer, general sewer plan.
And to some extent the sub-area plans for out there.
One of the things that Commissioner Jeffrey shared with those rulings for the Growth Management Act against us back then, and what we were being hit was on the comprehensive plan. That's what they kept hitting us
Yeah.
at.
Yeah, but actually back to one of Frank's bullets, some of the discussions from February 27th, it kind of mirrors the discussion we had 5 years ago about, well, if you're going to allow septic, how would you do it? And you know, some of the things we discussed back then were, well, maybe there would be a capital facility charge. They would put their side sewers in, so they're ready to go. They would develop in a way that they would build on their property in a way that wouldn't preclude sewer. There's some discussion about, well, if we needed to form an LID, is there a way to have them, does the CFC fee guarantee it's a yes vote for an LID, or are you courting a no vote for an LID if you know. But, you know, somebody who's paid a facility charge is probably going to want you, well, speculating, you know. I think you've got some elements up there that are consistent with the discussion you had with Commerce 5 years ago. Staff has changed, so probably a good time to re-engage them.
This may or may not have been asked. It seems that the Department of Ecology loans are mostly around either improving or ensuring water quality in this perspective. And when you think about Commerce and their role in this and management, sewer development is also a function of promoting development, encouraging urban development. I wonder if you're aware of funding sources that meet that requirement, need aspiration to limit sprawling, to encourage urban development.
We don't judge just on water quality. When we score an application, there's potential to score as high as 1,000. About a quarter of those points are dedicated to your positive water quality impact.
Oh,
So it's not like you get 0 points. It's just that you're kind of losing out on the major category. So we can fund a straight sewer project if we have enough money and can get down to where you are on the list.
grants too, or
Our grant funding is generally reserve it for existing residential hardship. So if you came to us, let's say you had 10 acres of existing residential low income within 100 acres of property that would develop in the future, we'd say, gee, that 10 acres, that's eligible for hardship funding. We can chip in grant money. It's 10% of the project. It would probably be a smaller level of grant. The other 90% is future growth. That's eligible for loan.
Different scenario. possibilities. Let's just say that we were to try and go for funding for that residential area, but not force hookup at all. Trying to get the pipe out there so it would take on new construction, and perhaps even construction if the property sold or something, or if their system went down. Would that hurt us on scoring for receiving the higher percentage? Because as you know, with our system, 50% ain't gonna cut it. We have to find a way to get the higher percentage to make it. But it would be great if nobody had to be forced, if we just,
I know what you mean, yeah. And I think it would hurt you on the score because we want to fund things where something's happening now. You're putting the pipe in the ground and it's going to sit there prospectively. We'd rather fund something that's going to, have an impact now. But that's not to say we couldn't fund it. It's to say you would
the
be
percentage would be.
lower. And our question might be, how are you going to pay us back? If you're not hooking up people, are you getting a capacity charge from these people as part of your project?
And that, originally, that was the plan we were looking at, was doing exactly that and trying to get the capacity charge by selling it early and stuff. Just the idea of not forcing them, still allowing them to hook up early.
Right.
You would still get a certain percentage no matter what. Some of the people would hook up just because the opportunity's there.
Right.
They're able to get in inexpensive. Others would not. And what we put together before showed 10 years.
Right.
But if we didn't even have that 10-year,
Right. There's value in having the sewer there in an existing neighborhood where people can, there's a water quality value to having the sewer in a neighborhood where it's available, where if you have a failure, somebody can hook up. So you wouldn't be shut out on points on that aspect.
Are you talking the old Belfair Highway?
yeah, but the idea of doing it without a force hookup at the end, allowing the connections to be, if they choose, but also to sell it to them cheap in the beginning, as we already put together in the original plan, to get as many of them as you could, and we figured that, there'd be a large amount that would actually hook up. But that was with a 10-year limit, but if there was no limit on it, I still would.
On the rate.
No, 10-year after 10 years, they had to hook up. But if we could do it without a forced hookup at the end, the amount would probably be a little bit smaller, but if we offered it cheap enough and made it so that they had to hook up if their system failed,
Or you have to hook up by the end of 10 years.
well, that was originally the idea, but I'm talking about if we did without that part.
I think we would have to talk about that one a little more.
'Cause I got your buy-in I got you guys buy-in with that other gentleman on the 10-year one 4 years ago. It's just now getting without forcing 10 years to hook up.
And I think the concern there ultimately is that we would lose out on the funding partnership potential from the port. The port provides a funding partnership, that option, that wouldn't be available if we looked at the phase 2 area only, which I think is an important factor.
Yeah, and I wasn't talking only, yes. Just wonder if it's even possible.
Trying to pull up the map.
Just out of curiosity, where are we on the list in our application that's in with you now? What's the dollar amount that would need to be appropriated for us to receive funding?
On the list.
I think you're on our draft list. You applied for $1.5 million?
1.5, and as I think I understood Jeff this morning, we will be eligible for getting half of that forgiven. So we would have $350,000 or $375,000 in as a loan, and then $750,000 on our dime.
Yeah, but that's still $1 million backwards we don't have.
Yeah,
On the phase 2 application.
on the phase 2, yeah.
Yep, so what I have is the Belfair UGA, the northern Ave, and This is identified as phase 2, and this is the original plan to run phase 2 sewer up into that area. We have identified an alternate, which we call the Roy Bode extension, and that simply runs up to 2 parcels predominantly, one up in this area and then one in, I believe, in this area, that is hoping to be given up development rights for, between the two of them, 225 ERUs.
To give up development rights?
No, to get development rights.
Oh,
So this is the other opportunity. This is $2.2 million? No.
More than that, it was 3.7?
3.7, right.
now the one problem
This
with,
was $7.5 million for this.
the one problem with that I see though, that I know of is, right where he's at now, where that pulls it over, that's taking it to an undeveloped area that has nothing there, and as far as I know, that's been scrapped for the time being. Doesn't mean it can't come alive, but it would make more sense to have a developer pay for that part, to bring it closer to them from, I'm talking about from the main road, from, like, let's say Newkirk or whatever. It just would make sense, because there's nothing there to take it to.
That can be cut back numerous places, Commissioner, as far as going north. That was carrying it to the furthest termini that we thought was feasible. We could scale that back to any one of the other property corners in there.
That black line's an existing road there, right? 'Cause if you take it through.
These are existing road center lines.
Okay, so the other one by the red over there, that's existing coming down, so I thought,
Yeah,
looking at the aerials.
yeah, that's
Sorry,
existing
yeah.
Newkirk.
Yeah, this was just where we drew the line in the sand and developed the cost
It was a
estimate.
great idea. I still think it's much better than the other, trying to go from highway.
And then this is the Belfair bypass running up into Route 3, and then the green pipe there is the proposed plan to run up to PSIC, PSIC, along the Belfair bypass route. The issue there is that either we scrub and grub that area to lay the pipe ourselves, or we work with the Department of Transportation and have them do that, or at least for the upper portion of it, so that we can lay the pipe in advance of them actually going in and doing construction. And that's a conversation with the Department of Transportation that we have not had. Any other questions?
Well, Frank, I think for me, I would like to see, maybe an opportunity for you and Jerry and Dave as well, to go back and take a look at all 3 of these potential options and then kind of weight them for ourselves, just so we have an idea of which proposal provides the most likely, support for funding, development, that kind of thing. If we could do it in kind of a ranking or project vetting on our side, I think that would be helpful.
Would it be helpful to have the Department of Commerce come in?
I think so.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I put in a call to the 2 gentlemen that were at our meeting, Greg.
Gary?
Gary
And
Heidelberg, just
Mark
established,
Gary.
and Mark is the head of
And Mark,
division.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think they'll be able to help you with that question about, how do we allow for septic within a larger plan of sewering, what's required, what's gonna pass what's gonna keep us out of court.
Yep.
I'm sure you can imagine if we can allow them to build there, then eventually when the time does come in the future that something happens, you'll actually have somebody hooked up too.
Right?
But right now, we're taking away all those people's property values.
Yep, I have spoken to both of them in the last week, and I have a phone call going back to them this afternoon. So I'll mention that to them and see what their availability is, and ask them to come out and meet with the commission. In a similar fashion as with the Department of Ecology, kind of get background and get some direction from them.
And we're happy to attend if you get some more questions in your mind between now and then about the finance thing that we can answer, you know, we'd be happy to come back.
Very good. Any questions? Any other additional? Well, thank you again so much for your time. I know this has been a years-long kind of process, and
I'm so glad you're only 30 minutes from Olympia.
yeah,
Especially today.
yeah, for
Yes.
sure. Well, thank you so much.
Sure, thanks very much.
Good to see you.
Good to meet you, yeah.
No,